Okay, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm gonna give everyone maybe like 1 or 2 minutes to kind of join, make sure they have a chance to join. So I will start the presentation at about like 2:01 or 2:02 or whenever the attendance level starts to slow down. So okay. Looks like attendance has slowed down, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Awesome. Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Kai, and welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on mastering your quantitative methodology. So this webinar is recorded, so you're going to have access to it. I think it's about 24 to 48 hours after the recording or after the presentation is over. And I believe it will, yeah, like I said, I believe it'll be sent out 24 to 48 hours afterwards. Sorry about that. So I'm going to answer all questions at the end, but please do feel free to type any questions you do have in the Q&A section kind of as we go along, and then I'll get to it kind of towards the end. Also stick around towards the end because I have some information on how statistics solutions can help you with your dissertation process. If I can get the slides to move, maybe. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so as a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today, so first we're going to talk about the purpose of the methodology chapter and why it's so important. And then we're going to go through each section of the methodology chapter and discuss the specific aspects of each. So we're going to go through the introduction, the research design, the population and sample, instrumentation, data collection procedures, data analysis plan, limitations, and then finally any ethical considerations that you might have. And then, like I said, towards the end, I'm going to leave some room for questions and then also just a little bit of information about us as a company. Awesome. So first things first, what is the purpose of your methodology chapter? So the methodology chapter is perhaps the most important part of your dissertation process because it sets the stage for the procedures, steps, and tests that we're going to use throughout the rest of your paper. Sorry, excuse me. I'm just going to take a sip of water before I continue. Okay, much better. So it's important to be thorough about exactly what instruments you're going to use, the target population of interest, and how you intend to recruit them, and the appropriate data analysis method. If your methodology is done incorrectly, the results of this discussion or of your results and your discussion might not be as accurate. Therefore, your methodology should be detailed enough that anyone can read through it and exactly replicate your study. So specifically, I like to think of a methodology section as a recipe. And I'm sure everyone here has kind of like an old family recipe for something like cookies. Specifically, my family recipe is for like chocolate chip cookies. So when you think about a cookie recipe, like what are we thinking of here? We're adding cups of flour, sticks of butter, and we're setting the oven to 350 degrees. Well, recipes are effective because they convey exactly what ingredients you need, how to combine them, what temperature to set the oven to, and how long to bake. If you follow the recipe exactly, you should come out with the perfect chocolate chip cookie every single time. Well, what if we thought about your study or your methodology as a chocolate chip cookie recipe? Each step of your methodology is the next ingredient or step needed to bake the cookie. Imagine your variables and instruments as ingredients. You're going to clearly define what those variables are and indicate how you plan to measure them. Then think about your population as the process of like combining those ingredients together, right? Discuss the population of interest and how you plan to recruit them. Finally, you treat your data collection method as if it's the oven temp and baking times you need for your cookies. Describe the method in which you obtained a plan and analyze your data, population size needed, etc. The reason I bring this up is that when you make your family's famous cookie recipe, you should be able to read exactly off of the recipe card and end up with cookies that taste exactly like the way your mom would make them. The same is true for a methodology. Any other researcher should be able to pick up your methodology and replicate exactly what you did. The best way to do this is using your school's guidelines. A lot of times you will have like a rubric or an outline of some sort that you need to follow. Those can be really helpful for making sure that you have all of the information you need. So if you ever get lost or stuck, first things first, always go to your school's guidelines and figure out what their requirements are for your methodology chapter. Awesome. So first aspect of your methods or your methodology is your introduction. So in this paragraph, it should be a paragraph length, max 1 page in length. And you should be restating the purpose of your experiment. Why exactly are we making these cookies? Why now? Why today? Why these cookies? Additionally, you should state, your research questions and your hypotheses, and then you should be briefly discussing what you're going to talk about in the next chapter or in the chapter. So your introduction should end with something along the lines of, in this chapter, I'm going to discuss the population of interest, the purpose, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Next is the research design. So in this section, you should state the type of research design you're using. So are we using an experimental study in which we are manipulating our variables, or we have random assignment? Or are we using pre-existing groups like gender, which would make it a quasi-experimental design? So you're going to identify what kind of design you are using. Is it correlational? Is it experimental? Is it causal comparative? And that's going to be based on your research questions and specifically the purpose of your study. Like, what are you specifically wanting to do here? And then you should explain why this design was then selected over the other designs. So say we're doing a quasi-experimental design, and we're looking for gender differences in stress. Well, unfortunately for you as a researcher, you cannot randomly assign people to be different genders. I think that's kind of not something that you as a researcher get to choose. So therefore, it would be a quasi-experimental design. That's because we have pre-existing groups and we don't have random assignment into those groups. So that's why you would explain why the design was selected. Then you would say, an experimental design was not selected in this case because, as I just said, we cannot randomly assign people into genders. So something along those lines, right? In terms of like, why are we using this specific design and why not something else? Cool. So once you've kind of set the stage for why you're running this study, now we're going to talk about who we're planning on studying in particular. So in this section, we're going to discuss the population of interest for your study. So the population is a broad group of individuals that your results are intended to generalize to. So you're going to describe this population and specifically why you chose to use them. So for example, if we're looking at differences in math scores between 2 different classrooms of students, an experimental classroom and a control classroom, we might say then that our population of interest is school children in 7th and 8th grade, because this is an age where they are at a developmental milestone for math. That's just an example. Or, you could say, well, my population of interest as whole is a clinical population of people who are clinically depressed, right? And why? Maybe in this specific experiment, we're again looking at stress. You can tell that my entire dissertation was on stress because it's the only example I give. But so say you're looking at stress, and we're looking, at a clinically depressed population versus like a control population. So that would be our population of interest. And like I said, we're going to explain why we would choose that specific group of people. And then from there, once you've determined your population of interest, the very next section is going to be your sample. So you're going to discuss how you plan to obtain a sample of these people. So a sample is a smaller group of people chosen from a larger population to then represent that population. So in this section, you're going to discuss your sampling technique. So are we using random sampling so that anyone in the population has a chance to participate? So in my previous example with, clinical population, maybe you're using random sampling in terms of, well, you send a survey out you work at a hospital, you send a survey out to everyone who has a diagnosis of depression. It's probably highly unethical. You shouldn't do that. But I think that violates some sort of HIPAA or FERPA. I don't know. Either way. Just an example though. Does everyone in that sample have an equal chance of being in this experiment? Or are we using convenience sampling? So in the case of the school children example, say we're looking at 2 classrooms and you happen to teach at a school and you already have 2 classrooms. So you make one your experimental and one your control. Well, in that case, it's a convenience sample because you're not giving everyone an equal chance in the school or even in 7th and 8th grade to be in your study. Additionally, you're then going to describe how you plan to recruit and obtain data from these people. So are we sending out surveys online through SurveyMonkey, or are we posting posters all over our campus for people who are interested to sign up? And then finally, in this section, we're going to use a power analysis to determine the minimum number of people needed for your sample. Awesome. So next is identifying and describing your instruments, or how you plan to measure each of your variables. So you should use this section to describe your instrumentation in detail. Firstly, you should describe the instrument being used and which variable or variables in your study it is specifically measuring. Within this section, you should then discuss how many questions or items are in the instrument, and how you should go about scoring those responses. If you need to create composite scores for your variable, you describe that in this section. Additionally, you should be providing reliability and validity information for the instrument to prove that it's a validated instrument by statistical standards. So reliability is going to be presented in the form of factor analysis. Sorry, reliability is going to be presented in the form of a Chromebox alpha. And then validity is going to be presented in the form of a factor analysis. And if you're using a validated survey or a validated instrument, meaning that you've used something that other researchers have already used before, they should have that information already available to you when you're looking up the instrumentation. Awesome. And then finally, once you've gotten all your variables operationalized and the population in your sample is determined, it's kind of time to put all of your ingredients together. In this case, that means describing the data collection procedures. So in this step, I feel like this is the most like a recipe these couple paragraphs are going to be, because you want to describe the step-by-step procedures that your participants are going to be expected to do. This means that you should be discussing where and how data collection is going to take place. So are we doing it in person, or are we doing it online via just like SurveyMonkey? Therefore, you should be stating, again, like I said, if the experiment's online or in person, approximately what will be expected of the participants during the course of whatever you're doing. So if it's a survey, you would say something along the lines of, you're going to be taking a 20-question survey. It's going to take 15 to 20 minutes. If they're doing some sort of intervention, you would say something along the lines of, the participant's going to come into the lab. We're going to have them fill out some demographic information. Then we're going to give them a stress test. Then you explain the stress test, right? Then after that, we're taking another survey to determine how stressed they are. Then they're going to take, a math test. I don't know. Just an example. It's not like that's what I did my dissertation on or anything. But this is also the section that you're going to describe your experimental and control group, if you have one, and then what each group is going to be expected to do. So if your control group is significantly different than what the experimental group is going to be doing, then you'd have to describe that step by step as well. Finally, you should state how you plan to gain consent from your participants, and if they will receive any compensation for that participation. There we go. I can speak words. Awesome. Also, it's important to note how and when each instrument will be administered. So that's like what I was saying earlier. Say you're having two different, surveys, and one's before a stress test and one is after the stress test. You should let your participants know before, say something along the lines of, we're going to have them come in, take one stress test, and then take another survey, and just kind of describe that step by step in your data collection procedures. Okay. So now that we have discussed exactly what your participants will be expected to do, now we're going to talk about how you then plan to analyze the data once it comes in. So first, you should state the program that you plan to run your data analysis in, so such as SPSS or Intellect Statistics. Also, firstly, describe how it's going to be compiled or entered into an electronic format if it is not already in electronic format. So say you did pencil and paper surveys, and then, you have to put that into an Excel sheet. Just describe that. Say, my participants will be using paper and pencil. They will, I will then impute the data into an Excel format and then upload to SPSS. Or if, it's already in electronic format, say you're doing electronic surveys, you would just say something along the lines of, the survey will be uploaded from or downloaded from SurveyMonkey into Excel and then loaded into SPSS for analysis. Something along those lines. Then, like I said, you want to state the software we're using for your data analysis. An example of this is SPSS. It's probably the most commonly used system, but our company, Statistics Solutions, we provide a data analysis service called Intellect Statistics. I can speak, I promise. But there are free things as well, like JASP and Jamovi are free, and they work very similarly to SPSS, which can get a little pricey if you don't have access to it already. Then you're going to describe how you plan to clean or prepare your data for analysis. So this includes cleaning for any missing data or outliers, and creating composite scores for variables of interest. So say you're running a survey and you kind of make a note to yourself and you say, okay, well, all of my variables and all the questions that relate to my variables of interest are at the end of the survey. So if I'm looking through these participants and I see that, less than 80% of the survey has been completed, you're just going to remove that analysis. So something like that. So if you come up with rules on how you plan to clean your data for missing data, then that could also be, say, you want to do imputation for missing data. Just write that down. Write that in your paragraph. Say, to clean for missing data, imputation analysis will be used, blah, 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 something like that. And like I said, same with outliers. We can use box plots, we can use Cook's distances. We've got a couple different tests for outliers. So just choose your outlier test and write that down. So if you want to use box plots, just say box plots will be used to determine if any outliers are present. Any outliers present will be subsequently removed from data, something like that. So then you're going to describe the statistical analysis that you plan to use. So which analysis you plan to use should be based on your research questions. So if you're looking for, say, differences between an experimental group and a control group when it comes to their levels of stress, then maybe we would use a t-test or an ANOVA. However, if we're looking for if we're looking for relationships between variables or pairs of variables, you're going to run, maybe a correlation or a regression. So then once you've kind of determined your appropriate statistical test that's based off your research question, you're then going to describe exactly how you're going to run the analysis and why it is appropriate for your research question. So what this includes is, say you're running a regression, there's such a thing called a regression formula. So that equals the dependent variable plus b times independent variable 1 plus b times independent variable 2 plus b times independent variable 3, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So if you're running a regression, you would add that equation in. Say you're running a t-test, you would just describe the t statistic, what it does, what it means. And kind of, we're looking for differences in means here. You could also add the equation. T-tests are not necessarily as equation heavy, but not the point. And then finally, you're going to talk about, how that analysis is going to answer your research question. So basically what that means is you're going to talk about, okay, well, now we've run the regression, or now we're going to run the regression. What happens when we run the regression? What does that mean for our data? And so what you'll say, something along the lines of is, we're going to run the regression. The results, if significant, are going to tell us that for each significant predictor that, the dependent variable is either going to increase or decrease based on the significance of the predictor. Something along those lines, right? And then finally, you're going to talk about the assumptions of each test. So if, like I said, if we're running a regression, that's going to be, you're going to run normality, lack of outliers, multicollinearity, homoscedasticity. Rather than if we're running a t-test, then you're going to talk about the outliers of normality. Again, it's always normality, and homogeneity of variance, stuff like that, and lack of outliers. So you should describe how each analysis or assumption is going to be tested, and then what happens if those assumptions are violated. So a good example of that is if you're running a t-test and the assumption of normality is violated, well, then we can run a Wilcoxon-signed rank test instead. A Wilcoxon-signed rank test is the non-parametric version of a t-test. So in your data analysis plan, just write that, right? Say, I'm going to test the assumption of normality. If it is violated, then I'm going to run this alternative test instead. And that's just an example. But that should all be in your data analysis plan. And then from there, the last two sections are going to be your limitations and your ethical considerations. So limitations is fairly straightforward. We're going to come up with a small list of the limitations of your research design. And this is based off of the design that you picked at the beginning. So our second paragraph right after our introduction, let's pretend we're doing a quasi-experimental design because I think I used that example earlier. So say we're looking at a quasi-experimental design. One of the limitations of a quasi-experimental design is that because we don't have random sampling, we have those pre-existing groups instead. Like I said, we can't randomly assign people to be different genders or to be in different classrooms. So if we have those pre-existing groups, it really limits our generalizability to the general population as a whole, right? So if we're doing a quasi-experimental design, that might be a limitation that we list out. Another example is, say we're just doing correlational research, right? As we all know, correlation does not equal causation. So therefore, if you're running a correlational study, one of your limitations would be, I can't show causality here. I can just show that there are relationships. And then you would just write a small paragraph about that. If you have a survey, talk about response bias. So a lot of the times participants will kind of think that they can suss out what your study's about, especially if you're doing surveys, and then they'll answer specific ways. Or another example of response bias is when maybe they see a question that kind of takes them off a little bit. Maybe the question is, how often do you drink alcohol? And they go, shit, I drink every day, but I don't want to tell them that I drink every day. And so they lie, right? And then they say, oh, I actually only drink one time a day, or like one time a week or something like that. So that's a response bias. And so if you have any type of survey, your response bias is always a limitation that could happen. Pre-post studies, so if we're doing have someone take a survey, go through some sort of intervention, and then take another survey. That's a pre-post study, where we are looking for differences before and after the intervention. Something like that, our limitations are attrition. Not a lot of people want to finish something that they start, which is something I've noticed in pre-post studies, because attrition rates can be really high, especially if your survey is already really long. So that's a limitation you could talk about. You could talk about testing effects, or, history effects. So a good example of a history effect is COVID-19, right? Did you start your pre-test right before the pandemic and then your post-test was after the pandemic? That is a limitation because of what happened in history, right? Well, not really history, a couple days ago. Well, a couple years ago. Anyway, not the point. Experimental studies, they don't have as many limitations, but a lot of the times you can have limitations in external validity. But basically this section should be very short, just a small paragraph, and just talk about your research design and kind of what limitations come with that research design. Awesome. And then the last thing you're going to do before you write a summary paragraph, because we should always end on a summary paragraph, is we're going to write about our ethical considerations. So the Belmont report principles, this is what you're going to write our ethical considerations on. So those 3 principles of respect for persons, justice, and beneficence. Wow, I almost forgot the Belmont report principles. And you're going to talk about how you are planning to make sure that these principles are followed through, right? So for example, maybe respect for persons, we're going to talk about how we're going to provide informed consent. If we're working with students or children, we now have to talk about, okay, well, students or children, especially minors, are a vulnerable population. Therefore, let's talk about justice here. Okay, young minors are a vulnerable population. Are we making sure that, when we're studying these minors, are we making sure that they are, being represented and that they are not taking the brunt of the harm so that other people can learn from it, right? So just talk about those, right? Talk about your IRB approval. Has it gotten approved yet? Are you planning to get approval? So if you're in the proposal stage, say something along the lines of, I plan to get IRB approval by this date, or I have already submitted IRB, I'm waiting for approval, something along those lines, right? What are the risks involved in your study? Are they minimal? Are they more than minimal? This is in regards to like beneficence, right? So we want to make sure that the costs outweigh, or that the benefits outweigh the costs, right? Specifically the costs being risk. Also, we're going to want to talk about how our participants' identities and information are going to be protected. So the best way to do this is de-identifying data. So that basically means instead of writing their names down, you're going to write, some sort of participant number so that someone analyzing the data can't go, I want to see this really personal information and I want to see who it traces back to. And then, if it's a number, there's no way to trace back to who left that personal information. And then finally, you're going to talk about how your data is going to be stored. So a lot of people will store their data in filing cabinets where only they have the key if you want to go like old school about it. Or more common now is a shared drive or a Google Drive or on their personal computer where they have no access to it or no one else has access to it. You're also going to want to talk about how your data is going to be, handled after the study is over. Are we going to keep it around as archival data or as long as it's stored safely? Or is this really highly personal information about participants? So do we have to destroy this data after we're done with it? So talk about that, right? Awesome. And really, ethical considerations is kind of a catch-all for just talking about the steps of how we're going to protect our participants, because especially in human subjects research, it is incredibly important to protect our participants. They are, respect for persons. They are autonomous human beings who deserve information and deserve to be able to give consent. So adding all of this information helps you to help the participant to understand what's really going on here. And it helps the IRB to understand that you need to be an ethical person. Awesome. Okay, so that is all of the information that I have for you guys today. I wanted to talk really quickly about Statistics Solutions, our company, and then I will go into the Q&A. So Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation consulting company. We provide students and young professionals with timely editorial support on their dissertations and scholarly projects. We do everything from chapter 1 to chapter 5, survey uploads, PowerPoint creation, prepping you for your presentations, prepping you for your defense, all of that stuff, basically every step of the process along the way. And so if you are interested in kind of reaching out to us about our services, we do have complimentary 30-minute consultations on Monday through Friday. The link here is on the PowerPoint, but there's also a phone number and an email that you can email. Excuse me. I'm gonna cough again. So if you are interested in working with us, please go ahead and schedule a consultation with us. That would be awesome. So I'm gonna leave this screen up while I go through the Q&As. So if anyone does want to write this information down, you will have plenty of time to. So awesome. Okay. So, question is, I'm using a partial least squared structural equation, modeling, for my exploratory quantitative study in my dissertation. Can you shed a little light on, PLS SEM? Unfortunately, I cannot talk too much about partial least squares or structural equation modeling. I do not do those that often, or often enough to really talk about them. In terms of like a data analysis plan, we do have some structural equation modeling data analysis plan examples on our website, Statistics Solutions, or Intellectus Statistics specifically. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know too much about partial least squares. Sorry about that. Mostly I just know like regressions, like hierarchical regressions, that kind of stuff. Awesome. Next question is, what are the costs for the services? Yeah, so it really just depends. We do a couple different types of services. So we do something along the lines of like a full dissertation service where, we're helping chapters 1 through 5. Obviously, that's going to be way more expensive than something along the lines of like just an hourly, right? So say, you're interested in getting help for chapter 3, but you've mostly gotten your chapter 3 done, and you just kind of want help on making sure, say, then you might get an hourly project, and that's not going to cost as much as if you were going to do a full dissertation service. It kind of just depends on what you're doing, so I couldn't give you like a good cost analysis. But if you are interested, someone who could give you a good cost analysis is my boss Janine. She's awesome. She's the person who you would be scheduling the 30-minute complimentary consultation with, and she'd be able to, either her or Brittany would be able to go through kind of the costs associated with what you specifically need to get done. So it really just depends on your needs. Awesome. So it looks like that's all the questions that we have right now. So I'll, keep it open for questions for like a couple more minutes. But other than that, I'm basically done. So I really appreciate everyone for coming, for sticking along, for asking these really intelligent questions, thoughtful questions. Like I said, this PowerPoint is being recorded, so you'll get this back. It should be sent to you in about 24 to 48 hours. So I really appreciate everyone for coming. Yeah, okay, got a couple more questions here. Awesome. So what tools can be used to determine population size? Yes. So it kind of just depends, right? So if you know your population size, say, you're working at a hospital and the number of clinically depressed people at the hospital, then that's how you would use your population size. Sometimes you can't really know what the population size is, especially if it's like, I'm just looking for young adults, ages 18 to 24. Maybe that's your target population. And to be honest with you, unless you looked at the US Census, I don't know if you could figure that out. However, for sample size, which would be determining the smaller sample of the entire population, the best tool is GPower. GPower is awesome. And it's really easy to figure out what sample size you would need. Yeah. And then last question looks like, can you give some more pointers on correlations? Sure. In terms of correlations for a methodology section, we're looking for relationships between variables. So, our research questions should have something along the lines of that, right? You should say something along the lines of, is there a statistically significant relationship between variable X and variable Y? From there, in your data analysis plan, you would say this is a correlational research study or a correlational quasi-experimental design. It really just depends. And then from there, you're going to talk about, why is a correlation like relevant to you? So if you're looking for relationships between variables, then that's why a correlation would be relevant. That kind of stuff. Then you would kind of go into something along the lines of, okay, well, after we run the correlation, this is what our data is going to look like. We're going to get a Pearson correlation of R. R is going to range from negative or absolute value of 0 to absolute value of 1, or specifically -1 to +1. And, you would talk about how the sign, positive or negative, means the direction, so on and so forth. There are on Intellex's statistics website some really good information, and the Statistics Solutions blog, really good information on correlations, if that did not answer your question. Yeah, and then can you explain how a student draft the data analysis if a student is doing Pearson R test? So that's kind of what I was just saying, right? So you would talk about, why is a Pearson R correlation relevant to you? Usually people use Pearson R correlations when they have continuous data, and they're looking at one continuous variable and the relationship with another continuous variable. If you had ordinal variables, then we would be doing a Spearman correlation, right? And that's something you can write down. Then from there, like I said, you kind of just go through, what is the Pearson R? What does it mean? What does the correlation coefficient mean when you get it? How are you going to talk about effect size? So that would be like Cohen's D, that kind of stuff. Like I said, we do have on the Intellectus Statistics website, we do have sample data analysis plans for pretty much every statistical test that you could think of, which is awesome. I mean, not all of them, obviously, but like regressions, correlations, t-tests, ANOVAs, MANOVAs. We've also got some non-parametric tests and some factor analysis stuff in there as well. So if you are looking for kind of example data analysis plans, I would definitely look on the Intellectus Statistics website. Awesome. Okay, looks like that is all the questions for today. I'm going to wait like one more minute, but like I said, thank you to everyone who decided to join and for asking all these really great questions. We have webinars all the time, and we also have drop-in sessions on Intellectus Statistics. So hopefully I will see some of you there. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.